The Torah closes the book of Vayechi with the story of the death of Yaakov, and that his children fulfilled the promise that Yosef had made to his father to bring him up from Egypt into the land of Canaan and to bury him in the burial plot that his grandfather, the patriarch Abraham, had bought from the Hittites as a burial ground for him and Sarah. And later Isaac was buried there. And when the children brought Yaakov to burial there, the Medrash tells us that Esav, his brother, came and objected, and he said, "You have no right to take this place for Yaakov. It belongs to me." And the children said, "But wait a moment. Don't you remember that episode with the when you came from the field and you were hungry and Yaakov had cooked some lentils, whatever, and at that point you sold the birthright to him? So you gave up your share." So Esav said, "No, I did not give up my share. I gave up the double share that a firstborn son has." Okay, so I don't have a double share, but I have a single share. I still have the rights here. And with my rights here, I object to Yaakov being buried here. And so there was discussion to and fro. One of the children of Dan, a grandson of Yaakov, was deaf. And he was not privy to what the discussion was all about. And after a while he saw that Yaakov was lying there and was not being brought to burial. So he said, "What's the problem here? Why isn't grandfather being buried?" They said, "Well, Esav is objecting." "On what grounds?" He said that he has a share. "Well, what happened then?" He said, "Well, Yaakov got the birthright from Esav, but then Yaakov also bought off from Esav his share in the Marat HaMachpelah. And he has a contract to it, and the contract is in Egypt. And so the Naphtali, who was so swift, Naphtali went to get and bring the contract and show Esav that the burial plot belongs to Yaakov. And Dan's son Hushim said, "You mean that we're going to let grandfather lie here until he comes back with the contract?" And he got so angry that he went and killed Esav. Now, the question comes up, why was Hushim the one who reacted? All the 12 children were there. The grandchildren were there. Why was Hushim the only one who reacted to defend the honor of Yaakov? And the answer is that Hushim was deaf, and he did not get involved in the discussions. You know, sometimes we are brought to a realization of something by a shocking occurrence. And the shocking occurrence arouses something within us. However, we can become callous to it. Let's see what's happened in our own days. Do you remember the horror that the country reacted the first time there was a shooting in a school? Students shot another student, students shot a teacher. That was horrible. And then there was the episode at Columbine, where there was a massacre. And one student shot a number of students dead and killed a teacher. And there was another horror reaction. But you know what's happened since then? There have been other school shootings. There's no horror reaction anymore. There's no outrage anymore. We've become callous to it. It's lost its shocking effect. And that is a danger. We ought to be able to retain a sense of right and wrong, that when something wrong happens, we are always outraged by it. We never should allow ourselves to develop an indifference to evil, to wrongdoing. And what happened in this case of the burial of Yaakov was that because all of the others were involved in the discussion, there was no shock value at all. Yes, Yaakov was lying there not being buried, but they were all in this discussion as to who does it belong to, doesn't belong to Esau, doesn't belong to Yaakov. Did he buy off the birthright? Did he buy off a share? Where's the contract? And all of this going to and fro. And they lost their shock value that Yaakov was not being buried, that this was disrespectful. The only one who reacted was Hushim, because he was deaf. And so he did not get involved in the discussion. And when he saw that Yaakov was not being buried, he was able to have the shock reaction that enabled him to attack Esau. I think this is an important message for us today. Things happen that are inappropriate. And the first time it happens, we are outraged. And gradually, it loses its punch. The story of the shooting of the schools is one example. The other example is, do you remember when just a few years ago, the cry of outrage that a physician assisted a patient in suicide shook the whole country up. It was on all the TV shows. Physician-assisted suicide. Horrible. That was then. What has happened since then? 2 states have legitimized it. In at least 2 states, it's not a crime anymore. And the pattern will be that other states will legitimize it and rationalize it. It's not an outrage anymore. It's only an outrage the first time it happens. Perhaps a little less the second time, and the third time it's become standard operating procedure. We have to be careful of that, and that's the message of this Medrash. Whenever wrong occurs, we ought to be outraged and do whatever we can to see that wrong does not occur. Let us not become indifferent. Let us not become calloused to acts of wrong and evil. That's the message of the closing portion of the book of Vayechi.